Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 55 of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. Now today, in celebration of the Lunar New Year, or Losar in Tibetan, I am introducing a new spin-off podcast of Everyday Buddhism called Where the Light Meets, Buddhist and Christian Reflections and Practice. The podcast is a conversation among four friends, myself, Holly Rockwell, a spiritual director and an Ignatian prayer guide, Levi Shinyo Walbert Sensei, a Bright Dawn Lay Minister and a Divinity and Chaplaincy student, and Christopher Kakuyo Ross-Leibow Sensei, a Bright Dawn Lay Minister and sangha leader. We hope to officially launch the podcast within the next couple of weeks, and of course I will announce it on all the social media channels you follow us on. But without further delay, here is Where the Light Meets. Welcome to Where the Light Meets podcast. Join the conversation among four friends, a spiritual director, an Ignatian prayer guide, a Buddhist Lay Minister and Divinity Chaplaincy student, a lay minister and sangha leader, and me, a lay minister and your host. We'll talk about how you can enlighten your Buddhist practice through Christianity, or how you can enlighten your Christian practice through Buddhism. This is Where the Light Meets. Welcome to the very first episode of Where the Light Meets, a spin-off podcast and also the 55th episode of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. So, what is Where the Light Meets all about? Well, the subtitle of the podcast is Buddhist and Christian Reflections and Practice. Yeah, that sounds pretty dry, doesn't it? So I'm going to try to lighten, pun intended, the explanation a bit by giving you the backstory of how this podcast came about. After more than 2.5 years of doing Everyday Buddhism, I kept thinking that another podcast was called for. It's like this little nagging, I got to do this. And then I can't do this. I don't have time for this. But it never let up. So I've learned in my life, if something like that never lets up, you just got to go with it. Even if if part of it seems illogical or dumb, you got to go. So that's one of the reasons I started this podcast. I wanted a podcast that was an interspiritual / interfaith dialogue between four friends about the teachings, practice, and ritual of Christianity and Buddhism from an everyday perspective. That's why it's a spin-off of Everyday Buddhism. You know, the light of self-knowledge, the light of faith, the light that a spiritual foundation shines, it shines brightly from all wisdom traditions. So in this podcast, myself, Wendy Shinyo Haylett, Holly Rockwell, Levi Shinyo Walbert Sensei, and Christopher Kakuyo Ross-Leibow Sensei. Christopher, you have too many names. We all meet to learn from each other and share how to discover and harness that light found in both Buddhist and Christian teachings for everyday reflection and everyday practice. My hope is that those who identify as Buddhist will give it a listen, and those who identify as Christian might catch a few episodes and let us know what you think. And the same goes for those who don't identify as any religion but are seekers, and also for those who left a religion, who maybe has carrying around a little cynicism about religion. Those people might find looking for a deeper connection to something they know exists, but they can't find it at their church. So we hope we can create a big inner spiritual community of listeners. So let's get right to it and introduce my co-host of this podcast. And we'll start with ladies first, Holly Rockwell.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited about this. My own journey is kind of models this in that both of those themes are sort of twined in my spiritual life. I was raised Catholic. My parents weren't particularly devout, but we went to mass and kind of went through the motions. And like a lot of people, I fell away from all that when I was in my 20s and early 30s. And what brought me back was I found Buddhist meditation, Zen Buddhist meditation, and started doing that. I must have still had some sense. I must have been a seeker still. I must have had some sense that there was more than I had ever gotten in. I think I always was wanting something more than I ever got in church. I got great gifts there, but something else, there was more. And so I started doing that and feeling a little conflicted, like a lot of, I think, Christians do. Am I worshiping something, that's not right? But I found meditation pretty rich. And then I found a Jesuit priest who's also a Roshi. Robert Kennedy. I think he's down in New Jersey, and he has a book, I think Zen Spirit, Christian Spirit, or something like that. And I read that, and I was like, oh, okay, these can be together. So I started reading. I read him. I was meditating. I found Thomas Merton. I found some of the Christian mystics, and they brought me back to feeling. And I did go back to Catholic Church for a while, and then I stepped back out because. For a variety of reasons, which we don't need to get into in this moment. But I find that the two things, that those kind of practices and the Buddhist sense of non-dualism and of oneness, it so enhances my Christian beliefs. So I'd like to share that. To me, I was interested just because this sounded so fun to me. And also because I think for Christians, God is way bigger than, we don't have to worry about exploring other avenues, those other paths of spirituality or faith. And I just kind of want to, at this time in our culture, to say there needs to be communication around understanding one another and opening and not being so scared of different practices. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Holly, you want to tell just a little bit about your background? We're going to have bios posted on our
sure.
on our page and show notes, but if you could just do a little, well, you could do your whole bio or an abbreviated bio, whatever you move to do.
Maybe. Yeah. So I was a lawyer, and then I was a bookstore manager, and then I wrote for a legal publisher, and then I ended up at a retreat house becoming an Ignatian prayer guide, which is a spiritual practice that the St. Ignatius of Loyola developed. He was the founder of the Jesuits. In a million years, I would not have imagined that for myself. But as you say, sometimes you jump into things that don't make any sense. And and from there, I decided to get certified as a spiritual director through the Hayden Institute. And now I'm in practice with Estuary Soul Care with a partner. A partner and I set up, and Estuary Soul Care is really about kind of what we're talking about too. I mean, I speak with people who have a particular faith, but I speak with a lot of people who are seeking, or even people who go to some sort of services, but still feel like they need somebody to walk alongside them as they try to look a little deeper.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my and I'm a master naturalist. I always like to, I know to me that is a part of my spirituality, a big part.
Exactly.
So that's my primary place I find God, I say, or spirit or creator, whatever words we want to use.
Awesome. What a awesome bio, and what an interesting bio. You were hitting all the, like, we didn't even talk about earth-based spirituality in my intro. So I'm glad you kind of shoved that in there, because I think it's something we need to talk about in these days. So thank you, Holly. And it's a wonderful bio. And we're going to love talking with you. And I hope our listeners are going to love you. Like I told these guys at the beginning, I'm going to start running polls on fan favorites, and we're going to see who everybody loves the most. Okay. No trying to get that title now, you guys. All right. So I'm going to introduce Levi, went from the woman to the youngest member of our crew. Levi Shinyo Walbert Sensei. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your bio, and your sort of why for being here?
Of course. Thanks for having me on and being a part of this. My name is Levi Shinyo being my Dharma name, no relation to Wendy. Same English pronunciation, different Japanese characters. Let's see about myself. I'm a minister with the Bright Dawn, a non-sectarian Buddhist organization, and I'm currently a seminary student looking towards some accreditation in chaplaincy and master's in theology. I'm in a theological seminary, meaning it is not one particular denomination, but it is run through the influence of the Moravian Church, which is a not terribly well-known group of Christians, but a very wonderful group, and I'm very happy to be there. So being able to be in seminary and learning about Christianity while also exploring my own Buddhist identity and practice has really led me to being very excited about this project and this podcast. I think there's a lot of dialogue between Christianity and Buddhism that can be extremely helpful to both practices. One of the things I'm focused on personally is understanding how religion is going to be playing in people's lives in this modern world. We're seeing that there is a shift from religion to spirituality, being the same kinds of organizational structures which for many, many years in America have held communities together are not having the same amount of sway on people. People are moving away from organized congregations and systems and towards exploring their own personal spirituality, myself included. As wonderful as that is, and there's a lot of freedom and a lot of new things to be discovered, there's also a lot of pitfalls. And I think that we're going to need people helping without forcing, I should say. So I'm really interested in hearing both the Buddhist and Christian responses to how we're dealing with this. And I think there's, we're at a point where we can learn from each other a lot more. We're not as structured and not as restricted in our spiritual paths as maybe we once were. And that has a good side and a bad side. So I'm excited to explore both of those. About myself a little bit more. My background is in philosophy. I have my undergraduate degree in that. My biggest influences are in the Shin school of Buddhism. And in philosophy would probably be process philosophy with Alfred North Whitehead and a number of other. I don't know what else more to say. I'm very excited to be on here. I'll hopefully be serving a little bit as the fact checker and theology or Buddhology kind of person.
Oh, we could use that, I think. So yeah, good.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, a little fact check. I think, it's a very interesting point you brought up there, Levi, about the fact checking and the theology and philosophy behind some of the spiritual traditions, the religious traditions. There's two ways of looking at religion. Right now I'm enrolled in a edX Harvard religious literacy course that's helping me a lot in viewing religions from two different perspectives. One from the perspective as a scholar or observer of religions, and one as somebody who has a devotional practice or understanding. And unfortunately, like everything in our culture, because we're so interconnected and social media is like, always on, people's devotional understandings of their own religious traditions end up being the most vocal, and then it therefore becomes stereotypical of that religion, when religion in itself, if you look at it from an objective or scholarly view, evolves with culture, changes within the tradition. It's not static, and so therefore it can't have a stereotype, just like anything else. That it's like Buddhist conceptualization. We can't put a label on it, as Reverend Gilmay Sensei would say. Once we put a label on it, we've stopped its existence. It can't be anything anymore. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think we need to check ourselves if we get all devotionally crazy here, which maybe we're not going to do that, but who knows? I know I'm capable of it. So that's my 2 cents. But thank you, Levi, for your introduction. It's wonderful. It's great to have your perspective from a theology school, chaplaincy study. It's just, and I know you're Mr. Philosophy because we're friends. So I always love that part of you. So on to I saved Christopher Kakuyo Sensei for last because he may be a fan favorite. He's got a way about him. He's a charming guy. And so here you go, Christopher.
I thank you very much, Wendy Shinyo Sensei. I appreciate it. My journey to this podcast, ever since I was literally a young child, I've always been a seeker. My family was very Catholic. Matter of fact, I just found these devotional cards from my grandmother. This was sent to her by her sister in 1905.
Wow.
So our family, we had a lot of priests and nuns in the family, and we were very, very Catholic. But then my mother grew up during Vatican II, and she had a conflict with birth control in the church after being diagnosed with MS. And there became a schism in our family, so we kind of moved out. And at that point, we started going to other churches, and we did Unitarian Universalists for a while. I was always still attracted to Catholicism and the ritual. I remember the Cathedral of the Madeleine in Denver was one of my favorites, and then I moved to Salt Lake, and we have one here. And I still go there from time to time to talk to Our Lady of Guadalupe. So my journey started in Catholicism, then it kind of moved through general Christianity. And I remember once when I was like 19, I started to write a book called The Life of Saint Elias. And it was going to be some story about spiritual insights that I thought I had at 19, which I realized quickly weren't very many. But my seeking continued. And then I fell in love with a young Latter-day Saint girl, a Mormon, and I was introduced to Mormonism, to the Latter-day Saints, and became part of their community. And in some ways, it gave me a surrogate family, and it gave me an opportunity for self-expression. And I ended up going on a LDS mission for a couple of years and had some really challenging time engaging with what I would say the intersection of everyday religion and the intersection of dogmatic religion, and how we engage with those. And I met so many amazing, beautiful Christian people who in so many ways were so much more Christian than a lot of my companions. which always was kind of this constant struggle in my own mind. So I came home from my mission, and probably about 3-4 years after I came home from my mission, I realized that this was not speaking to me. This was not my path. This was not my way. And from there, I moved into, again, earth-based religions, Native American spirituality, and at the same time, deep ecology. And that brought me back to some dabbling I did with Buddhism early on in my life. And I started exploring Buddhism again. But for many of us who come to Buddhism, we've touched Buddhism multiple times through our lives before we come home to Buddhism. And that may be true of other faith traditions also. So I started to explore that. Then from there, I went into poetry, and romantic love became my religion for a while. Then I started reading some of the mystics like Master Eckhart, Kabbalah. Then I found Rumi and fell in love with Rumi, the perfect combination of like God and love, poetry and God, and went down a path, a journey with Rumi. And more not the Rumi of Coleman Barks, but the Rumi of Islam and mystical Islam, which was very rich. And I had some really powerful experiences. And yet there's something, again, I think what we're looking for, people call it love language when it comes to relationships. I think there is a spirituality language, a language that resonates with us, that communicates with us, those higher spiritual aspirations that we may have. And they really found those in Buddhism. And they found it in Pure Land Buddhism initially. Part of my journey is this constant wrestling, dialogue, dance that I have, being partially secular in my mind and being mythological and devotional in my heart. And having a dialogue between those two. And sometimes one wins out over the other and the other wins out over the other. But part of the journey is allowing them both to have that space to talk. And I've become a richer person because of that. And I think a much freer person in my exploration. And I've really enjoyed that journey. Why do I think this podcast is important? I think this podcast is important because partially of what Levi said about people looking for their own spirituality, and a lot of times we tend to be looking for our spirituality individually. And I think that's an important starting point. One of the things we do at the Salt Lake Buddhist Fellowship, which I'm a founder and practice leader of, is we really focus on this idea of spiritual practice as community and that important intersection. And I remember one of the challenges I had, some of the good experiences I had in the Christian tradition, and some of the challenging experiences all revolved around this idea of community. And how did we create that community? One of the things that's unique about our sangha is that we have people who are atheists and we have people who believe in God. And we meet together. Because what you believe is yours. It's none of our business what you believe. What unites us as a community is our commitment to follow a certain way of life, a certain path. And Christian and Buddhist, Jew and Muslim, we can all do that same thing when we focus on those highest aspirations that we all have. And I believe that that's love. That's love for one another, love for the planet, love for this creation, this experience that we're having as human beings. And that we can celebrate this thing that we're all sharing. It reminds me of something Kurt Vonnegut said, talking about dying, and he says, in the end, I can think, lucky mud, lucky me, that I got to sit up and look around for a while. So that's why I'm here. I'm really looking forward to the dialogue. I'm learning so much, and I'm having a fun time even contemplating God again. And I'm free to do that. That's a beautiful thing, is that I have that freedom to contemplate God. A lot of my Buddhist friends, they're very atheist or secular, and they go, that's stupid, that's dumb. Whatever, I can do whatever I want because it's my life and my journey, and it's beautiful to be here and to be able to do that. So,
Wow, thank you, Christopher. I was going to try to loop you back to your background, but you did give a little bit of it. Did you want to talk more about? You kind of did in your introduction. You're a poet, and you founded the Salt Lake Buddhist Fellowship. How many years ago was that?
It's going on 9 years.
Unbelievable.
And the thing that's really amazing is we've actually grown more during COVID and our inability to meet together. One of the things that's really powerful about our group is our in-person meetings. There's this sense of safety, this come as you are, and we really mean it. It's not just a tagline. And even so, there's something about this message of community that really is something that I think a lot of us are longing for. And some of the best Christian churches I've been to are ones that focus on the community and not the dogma. Because that's the everyday Buddhism, the everyday Christianity. That's where we meet. That's where we live. And I think if we can start talking more about that, then we're going to start meeting the needs of all the communities.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I was reading something this morning, and honestly, I pick up so many different books when I'm reading in the morning. And I'm trying to sift through and decide where did I get this thought, which book, and I can't remember. But it was talking about, the community that we call sangha in Buddhism, and is more like the community that they call the body of Christ in Christianity. And I think that's something missing in the understanding of both Christians and Buddhists. The body of Christ is not, everything is sort of symbolic and mythical. Christopher is our resident poet and storyteller, but I think the stories that we find in the Bible and the stories we find in the Mahayana Sutras of Buddhism really circle around that more than I think we like to talk about in Buddhism. I know I as well as Levi and Christopher are probably on the same hundreds of different Buddhist groups in Facebook. And unfortunately, a lot of the discussion focuses around these minute little theological points that start arguments left and right, not necessarily arguments, but back and forth, and people get really I don't know, they're so attached to their own perspective and point of view they that's all they're trying to do is communicate their point of view. And I rarely see anything about the heart. And you touched on that when you talked about love. And I think that's what you find in Christianity that I have missed in Buddhism, is that the body of Christ, or the church, the people are the church. Well, you hear that a lot in Catholicism as well, and other Christian churches. So yes, the sangha, sometimes your sangha is I think different and something to be held up as a symbol of what we could be as a Buddhist sangha. But we don't always find that in Buddhist sanghas. I think we find much more of a rote ritual, authoritarian sort of way of being.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would also agree too that the sangha is the body of the Buddha. I really think that we can use this similar language to express, and I think the challenge is Western Buddhists, because they're dealing with trauma, because losing your religion for whatever reason still can be traumatic.
Oh, it is traumatic.
When we see people's reactivity to just the word God. I had somebody say, don't use that word. I'm like, oh, God. It was in a bar, so it was appropriate. But the idea is that they do intersect. And there's something about thinking about the Sangha as the body of the Buddha. It's Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching that Maitreya, the Buddha of love that is going to come, is probably not a person, but the Sangha. It is the community. And I think we're just afraid of that language that reminds us of our trauma, that we run away from it. And I think it makes us poorer when we do that.
Yes, exactly. That's it. It's that reactivity. You hit the nail on the head. It's the reactivity to the, I call it when I even talk. One of the reasons why I started this podcast is because when I talk about these subjects on my Everyday Buddhism podcast, because my Everyday Buddhism podcast, I'm quite aware that my audience, or I think I'm quite aware, it's hard to be aware of a big audience of who they are and what they really want. But I think I'm aware that they're mostly secular. And because of that, I when I bring up the word God, I usually say the G word. And if I bring up the word faith, I say the F word. And because I know, or I'll say trigger warning, it's like, because I know, and that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast is because I felt if it was missing in me, at my age, through all the things I've been through, which I'll tell a little bit about my bio, it's got to be missing a lot of other people too. I can't be the only one that feels this. I cannot. I know that's not true.
One thing that I wanted to point out too, that on this discussion, a translation of sangha, which I have always defaulted to, is that sangha doesn't mean the community of Buddhists only, or any kind of Buddhist. It's the community of truth seekers. So I think when you extend that to understand that really all of us, even people who want nothing to do with religion or spirituality, are truth seekers on their own way. Everyone's interested in the truth, but many people go about it differently. So I think from at least the Buddhist perspective of it, walking into a church or a mosque or a temple, you're going to encounter a community of truth seekers. How they react may be differently, and how they express that seeking can be radically different. But I think going to the heart of it, the Buddhist Sangha of the Triple Gem, it exists everywhere, and it's difficult to find it, difficult to see it. But I think once you start looking, it's far easier to notice.
I like that. And I think that's something we can adopt in the way we present this podcast, since we're sort of feeling our way here, is that this Buddhist Sangha, everyone's invited, and it is the body of Christ. It is the body of the Buddha. It is the body of the community that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about and Christopher talks about, or the coming Buddha Maitreya. So I'm going to give a little bit about my bio because I realized I was the only one that didn't. I've been a seeker since I've been a seeker since I've been a baby. I don't know. I mean, it's like my biggest memories are of religion. And I don't know why. It's like religious symbols, and I grew up in a pretty non-religious family. Could be why. I was always looking for something that wasn't there. But in fact, my mother was a symbol of faith. She did believe, and she was the only one in my family that did believe. My father was a scientist. It was bah humbug for him. And my three brothers, of course, because they were brothers, they had to emulate my father, and everything was bah humbug for them. And I really was odd man out, or odd woman out, if you will, in my family. But one of the things that my earliest remembrances is it got into me. And whenever I saw representations, like symbols like crosses or whatever in any of my grandmothers or whatever family, it really touched me. And then my best friend, Chrissy. Hi, Chrissy. Hi, Chris. I'm going to invite you to this podcast so you can hear about yourself. She was Catholic, and she still is Catholic, but we lived in a very little town, and there was this one corner of the main street, and at each corner there was a church. Okay, there was a Methodist church, there was a Protestant or community church, which was Disciples of Christ. Okay. There was a Lutheran church, and there was a Catholic church. My friend Chrissy was a Catholic. My mother went to the Disciples of Christ, the community church. So I would go. I went to Sunday school. I went to Bible school. I was like the devoutest little kid you could imagine. And I felt found community in like church camp and Bible school, and I really loved it all. I'm not sure really why. I just was connected. But at the same time, I went to Catholic church with my little friend Christy, and I was awestruck. It was the ritual, it was the liturgy that was not there in the community church, and it seemed like I had like got on a spaceship and went somewhere else, and I just loved it. And this was back in the day. Okay, it was in like late 50s, early 60s, and there the air was thick with incense, and the robes were there, and the swinging of the incense, and the chanting, and the pounding of the chest, and I was just transfixed. And I remember asking Chrissy's mother and father if I could always go with them and not go with my mother. And they said, well, we wouldn't mind, but I think your mother would. So that sort of put an end to that. But looping my mother back into it, one thing that my mother was a symbol of faith for me. She would go to church, and she would always talk to us about sickness and death in terms of like, don't worry, Jesus and God, and it's just a body and things like that. And I followed that right along. And then when I was an early teen, of course, I became a rebel and said, I don't, I remember quoting to her that it was Christianity was the opiate of the masses. And I was practically insulting her. And so I rejected it. And then when I was in my late teens, I started suffering panic attacks. Horrible panic attacks. And my mother graciously and gently led me back to church. And I remember she had the minister come to my house, and the minister brought me the New Testament. I still have it, that he gave it to me. He brought me the New Testament, and he started pointing out verses that had to do with anxiety. And I thought, oh, wow, there's something in here that means something here. That maybe, I'll look at this. And then I got so into it at that point, I got all devout again. And I said, I want to get baptized. Well, I realized my mother was never baptized, and because she was scared of the water. And we were in the Disciples of Christ, and there was a baptismal pool in the church, right? And you wore a white robe, and the minister held you and plopped you down backwards and kept you under for a little while, for just enough to feel like you were drowning, and then brought you back up again. So I thought, okay, Mom, there's a baptism scheduled for Easter week, and I'm going to get baptized. I want you to get baptized too, and I'll be in the pool with you. So we did that. And the memory is profound for me because we were baptized together. And so she brought me back to faith. And even though she wasn't interested in discussing theology, and she told me it was, and it's over my head, blah, blah, blah. She always had that faith. And so I have been looking for faith my whole life. Did not know that. I found Buddhism in my 20s after a spell of Hare Krishna due to George Harrison, and due to running into a bunch of Hare Krishnas at the airport one day in Cleveland. And we sat down reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I was just in love with these guys too, because they were just so devout and so carried away. And it's that when you see that, it's sort of like when the Buddha went out and saw the monk, and he saw that light, right? And he said, oh, I want that, whatever that is, I want that. And so I've sort of always been touched by that. I want that, whatever that is, I want that. I remember Honen wrote a poem that Honen is the founder of Jodoshu, Pure Land Buddhism. And he wrote this poem that says, the moonlight shines into every hamlet in the land, but only those who gaze upon the moon can carry its radiance in the heart. The other thing he said that stuck out to me was, quote, our everyday experience is fleeting, however wonderful or awful, yet at the same time, something endures, something eternal, something wonderful persists that lifts our life. And I know I've always been looking for that. And I went through Tibetan Buddhism. That ritual again drew me in, but then then I got sick of it. And then I went to Bright Dawn and I found Pure Land Buddhism, and I felt that faith again. But again, I never quit reading the Christian mystics. I never quit reading the Bible. I never quit reading Richard Rohr. I never quit reading many of the Jesuits or listening to podcasts. And today you can kind of listen to podcasts or go to any kind of church thanks to the pandemic. So it's great. So that's a little bit about me. And I think I just want to wrap it up by saying it's that I think that faith feeling is that feeling of love. It's that feeling of being accepted. And I think Buddhists may say they're not looking for that, but I'm wondering if they are.
I think that just our, in Buddhism, I should say, the language is so different sometimes that those like me, who are converts to Buddhism, the language can be elusive. For example, the Triple Gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the teacher, the teachings, and the community are at the heart of Buddhism. But because we are talking about them differently, and we don't use the same words in Christianity often, the ideas and concepts can get lost. The Sangha, the community, is a huge part of Buddhism. It is a community-based faith tradition, and that entails love and entails that compassion, that grace that comes from others. I always think of the grace story in Buddhism is not when the Buddha got enlightened. It's not when the gods came down to him or gave him anything. It's when, after rejecting asceticism, Siddhartha, the historical Buddha, had left, and a woman saw a starving man and gave him food. That's the moment of grace in Buddhism. That is the sharing of the community, and that of that love and faith and compassion. And that's what I'd say upon that. The language can be different, and if we don't have the background in it, especially people not raised in a Buddhist community and a Buddhist culture, it can be a little difficult. And I think that's being able to relate things back to Christianity as the point of this podcast, I think can do a lot in terms of elucidating some of the aspects of Buddhism that are not always put at the forefront in America.
I also think, too, one of the great benefits of this kind of dialogue is that we think we know. Like, we think we know what Buddhism is. We think we know what Christianity is, this monolithic thing that you can define. There is no Buddhism, there is Buddhisms. There is no Christianity, there's Christianities. And once we can start letting go and approach it with, well, I don't know. I'm curious. I don't know. And I think sometimes be able to talk about maybe a different tradition, it can shed a light on our own tradition. We can start to see it in a way that we never really saw it before. We can see the richness of it. I think a lot of people who leave the Christian tradition because of some trauma or some disbelief or the way they were raised, that view may be myopic. Mine was myopic for a long time about my faith tradition that I left when I left Christianity. Now I have such a greater appreciation for it than I ever did as a Christian, as a Buddhist. And there's also that great book out there, I can't think of the author right now, Buddhism Made Me a Better Christian. It's a great book. Well, you know what? Christianity has made me a better Buddhist. And we should be able to say those in both directions without having a hitch in our voice. Because, well, I can't say that. I can't say it. Well, you can say anything in your exploration of spirituality and what it means to be a human being. We are experiencing it. And I think that's one of the things I hope we talk about is the experience of being a Christian, the experience of being a Buddhist, and not get hung up in doctrinal points of view that, as the Buddha said, are nothing but a tangle and can create more suffering.
Amen. That's absolutely well said. Hey, Holly, I saw you getting in here. Are you on something?
I wanted to pop up just in general with community, because it is a thing that, and I so agree with you, Christopher, there are Christianities, but it's such a common theme in the Christianities that I have experienced, community. And we talk about it. We talk about love your neighbor. We talk about serving, we talk about fellowship. And yet, a lot of people feel lonely. Now, Catholics aren't as big on fellowships, so people come in and out and like nip in, go to mass, nip right back out. Other, Protestant denominations maybe have, more focus on coffee hour and so forth. But I think there's an existential loneliness and disconnectedness culturally. And so I think that's probably reflected in all of the various spiritual paths. And what are the practices and the ways that we can take those teachings and let them, because I think we all agree it's all about love. It's all about connection. It's all about, a sort of unified consciousness or connection or kingdom. And so what are the practices and what are the ways we can think about this that help lead to that? And maybe sort of assuage some of that loneliness and that alienation, no matter what your practice is, no matter what your spirituality.
I think that's a great point. Our fellowship, we have, it's kind of funny, we have a lot of people in recovery that will show up on a Sunday, not so much now, but before. And there were actually a few ladies who said, "Oh, I like your fellowship, but there's so many people in recovery," as if though that's a bad thing. And I think the people who come in recovery, they come from all kinds of faith traditions. They come because they feel safe. They feel accepted. They feel embraced. And I agree. I remember being Catholic and everybody's peace be with you in the pew and they're leaving in the parking lot cussing at each other. And that disconnect was so hilarious to me, even as a kid. And I think people are longing for that. And I think we can learn from one another in our traditions that, like you said, that existential need and how we can share that and how we can bring that to the forefront.
I agree. And I think both of your emphasis on praxis or practices, we can talk about they think this and they think this and this person thinks this and this was wonderful, it made me feel good, but how do we use that? How do we use that every day is very important. You as a spiritual director, Holly, I mean, that's kind of what you have to do, I think. It's part of your job description, right? To do that. Though the three of us are all lay ministers with the Bright Dawn tradition, and the layness of our program was all about it was done purposely. Instead of being ministers of Bright Dawn, we were given a mandate to be perpetual students so that we can be companions of those seeking spirituality. So I think the layness of our mission statement from Bright Dawn, I think, drives us to continually want to reach out to more people in a lot of different ways as spiritual friends, not necessarily as preachers, or some sort of hierarchical teacher who's obtained the next level of enlightenment or whatever the heck. So yeah, and another thing I wanted to say, and I don't know if it's necessarily related, but I'm throwing it in here anyway, is that our culture right now, and it's not something I'm saying that we don't all know, is been so divisive for so many years. And I think we've reached the culmination in this past year, probably due to the pandemic and the stress it has on everyone. The feeling of aloneness, the feeling of fear, the feeling of like our whole life is not even what we thought it was. I think it only emphasized the divisiveness and the feeling of, okay, I'm good here, I'm standing here, I think right here, I have the truth, and everyone else is another. Okay. And one of the ways that I think we can break down the otherness that this culture seems to embrace due to, I don't know, social media. We could put a lot of blame on a lot of different things. But one of the things that we need to do in this podcast, I think, is to show how we are not others by how what we practice, how what we believe is just like what you believe and practice, whether or not we're using the same terminology.
And one thing that before we end, I wanted to say, I think there's an acknowledgement that when we're having cross dialogue between Buddhism and Christianity, it is an acknowledgement of difference. As much as I think that there is so much to talk about and so much positive results by having this kind of interfaith dialogue, there has to be essentially a time where we can say that there are differences and still be okay, that we can be a spiritual community who does not all agree. And I think throughout this, and maybe as a little bit of a teaser for next episode, the theory, as much as it can get in the way, can also be essential. Praxis is the application of theory in actual life. If we're not clear on that, we can really fall into potholes in which both Christianity and Buddhism breaks down into something that is dead. And I think that's something we all want to avoid. These are living practices. So difference is okay. And we're all a lot of different people, even just among all of us and then the entire country of the United States is made up of differences. The whole ideology or concept of America as a melting pot has been very much over the years replaced with, I think the new term I've heard is kind of a chili bowl. We're all together. All of our different parts form a unified whole, but they're still different. And that's okay. And that's a beauty. If we're all, kind of one homogenous thing, we take all the beautiful colors of the rainbow and turn them into a dull gray. I think the one beautiful thing I'm looking forward to this is talking about the differences, and having a little bit of holy envy towards the differences. There are things that Christianity has that Buddhism doesn't, and maybe should consider, and vice versa. There are things that Buddhists do that Christians can learn from. So yeah, I wanted to say that to counterbalance. I'm happy playing the devil's advocate. I'm gonna try not to be too annoying by it. But,
no, bring it on, Levi. Bring it on.
Well, and it's true, not just Christian traditions too, because the Sufi tradition is one that I am a lover of, and sometimes I'm envious that Buddhism doesn't have that similar language. Mm-hmm. To be able to talk about the divine with eros, and it being completely okay, it could be actually valued. As Ibn al-Arabiya once said, supposedly, that to understand the love of God, a man or a woman needs to fall in love, because that's the closest you can understand of God's affection towards us. And I have a little envy of that. Buddhism gets a little overly equanimous sometimes, especially being a love poet. It's like, come on, people.
Yeah, well, the Senbutsu Ge is a love. I think that's
absolutely.
the love poem. About the radiant face, and Dharmakara, is fell in love with the Buddha. And David Brazier always says Buddhism is caught, not taught. I think that's the same as religion. All religion, caught, not taught. And I'm with you on I love to listen to Sufi music and Islamic music, because my heart just like explodes. It's like, so where is that, and although I do I chant the Heart Sutra every morning, there is this sort of rigidness that doesn't have that explosion of heart love, So that goes back to Levi's point, and I think I love this point, is that yes, they are different. Let's talk about what's different about them. And in the talking about the difference of them, maybe stir a little holy envy in other people, because they didn't even know those things existed, because they had stereotypical opinions of what this was and what that was. And since Levi will be our resident devil's advocate, or theology police, or philosophy police, that would be good, because he actually said, I'm going to tease our next episode, and he's going to be featured in the next episode. That's kind of how we're going to do this. each one was going to take sort of a theme and run it through, and we're all going to respond. But the next episode is going to be why language matters. So that's going to sort of establish some goalposts for us as we go forward.
And I just want to say how much I honor that, because it's so easy for any of us to go awry if nobody's pointing us back to the original teachings and, you know, the wisdom that has lasted all these years, and saying, well, wait a minute. Then, you know, I think we've all seen cults and weird sects and places that are where somebody gets a notion and runs way over here. And so it's really good to say, well, wait a minute, how does that tie back to this? So glad to have Levi.
And also, too, it'll be interesting for us to uncover our own blind spots when it comes to our Buddhist tradition or our Christian traditions, where we actually think we know what we're talking about, and we may be misguided.
I'm gonna love that. I think we have to be all up front and like wave the white flag at ourselves when we just caught ourselves in one of those things.
My ending point I'd like to say that I hope is encapsulation of everything I'm hoping this podcast will be, is that both Buddhism and Christianity originally arose as a system of dialogue. It is something where our beliefs, our faith, and our understanding of ourselves and our experience are consistently challenged. And out of that challenge comes growth. If we are simply ready to say, I believe this and nothing else, you know, that's a dead religion. That's a dead faith tradition. You know, the growth and the questioning and, you know, even sometimes if it can get nitpicky with theology and this or that, we have to have a theory to employ into praxis. And to be challenging that always leads to growth and experience in everyday life. So we can't have one without the other.
Wow, that what an ending point, unless somebody else got something better. Amen. Hallelujah. Right? Yeah, that is just awesome. Thank you, Levi. He's gonna, I know he's gonna keep us going here. Thank goodness for him. So that's about the end, I think, of our intro podcast. You know, it's so exciting. We're doing a new podcast. Yay! It's so exciting. I mean, I've been doing one for 2.5 years. I guess I still have I want the new one again now. So I just want to share that this is going to be a podcast of its own, Where the Light Meets, which will be found in all the usual places. I will plug it like crazy on Everyday Buddhism for people who don't know about it. And like I introed at the beginning, the very next episode of Everyday Buddhism will in fact be this episode. So whether they like it or not, they're getting this. So then maybe they will hop over and you know, we may share some. I might share some on Everyday Buddhism when I think it's particularly appropriate to do that. But we're going to try to keep a pretty good schedule of podcasts here, since there's 4 of us, which will help, because if one co-host can't make it, maybe the others can, and we can just keep going. And I would like that. So we'll let everybody say their goodbyes. Hey, we should come up with a goodbye that's interspiritual. You guys got one? Maybe we have to think of that, huh? So we'll just say until next time, and we will meet in the light. That's it for this episode of Everyday Buddhism, episode 55. And I hope you enjoyed this introduction of the new podcast, Where the Light Meets. And hope you consider adding it to your subscriptions when it is officially launched. And don't forget that you can join me and others in the private donation-supported Everyday Sangha that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Thursday evenings, 7:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And please consider supporting the efforts of this podcast and related groups by becoming a community member for $5 a month. If you do, you will have access to blogs, members-only podcast, education series, a private Facebook group, and hopefully more to come. So until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.